Imagine an empire stretching across more than 5,000 kilometers along the most rugged mountain ranges on Earth. Imagine cities built on cliffs above the clouds, roads carved into deep canyons, and 10 million people living in perfect organization under the rule of an emperor they believed was a living god. This was the Inca Empire at its peak in the early 16th century, the largest, richest, and most powerful civilization in pre-Columbian America. It was an empire that had every reason to believe it would endure for centuries. And then, in just 18 months, it all vanished. The emperor was dead, cities were burning, and an ancient culture was brought to its knees. What makes this one of the most extraordinary stories in human history is not just the speed of that collapse, but the fact that this mighty empire was not overthrown by a massive army, nor by an apocalyptic natural disaster. It was brought down by a band of exactly 168 Spaniards. To understand how 168 men managed to conquer 10 million, we have to go back a few years, to a time when no European had yet set foot on Peruvian soil. What the Spaniards did not know was that their deadliest weapon had already arrived in those mountains long before them, and it was invisible. When the conquistadors conquered Mesoamerica, they brought diseases with them to which the indigenous population had no immunity. Smallpox, influenza, and measles spread along trade routes like an invisible ghost. Faster than any horseman, around 1527, this silent plague reached the heart of the Inca Empire. Hundreds of thousands of people were dying without ever having seen the face of a white man. The scent of death and horror filled the mountains. And then the disease struck at the very top. The mighty emperor, Huayna Capac, a man who had ruled the empire with an iron fist for decades, suddenly fell ill. His body was covered in sores, and within a few days, the ruler was dead. Just weeks later, the same fate befell his primary heir. In a matter of months, the empire was left without its living god and without a clear successor. A massive power vacuum emerged. The Incas did not have a strict rule for royal succession. Instead, the crown went to whichever son proved most capable, and Huayna Capac had dozens of sons. From that chaos emerged two brothers, Huascar, who was backed by the traditional elite in the capital of Cusco, and Atahualpa, who commanded the most battle-hardened military generals in the north. Neither brother was willing to back down, and the empire shattered. A bloody 3-year civil war began. Brother rose against brother. Cities were burned to the ground. Fields were left uncultivated, and hundreds of thousands of veteran warriors died on battlefields from north to south. By the time Atahualpa finally claimed victory and captured his brother, the empire was utterly exhausted. The people were drained, the infrastructure destroyed, and the belief in the empire's invincibility was deeply shaken. Right at that moment, while smoke was still rising from the scorched battlefields, a man named Francisco Pizarro landed on the coast of Peru. Pizarro was a man of humble origins, illiterate, but driven by a blind obsession for gold and glory. He had already tried twice to find the rumored wealthy kingdom to the south, and both times ended in disaster. He had survived diseases, attacks by locals, and even 7 months stranded on a desolate island, crawling with venomous snakes. But Pizarro refused to give up. He sailed to Spain, stood before King Charles V, and secured an official royal commission to conquer. In the spring of 1532, Pizarro landed on the coast with just 168 men, around 50 horses, and a handful of small cannons. When they reached the coastal city of Tumbes, they expected a grand, wealthy port. Instead, they found only ruins, burned buildings, and empty streets. It was the first sign to Pizarro that something extraordinary was happening inland. He soon learned about the Civil War and realized he had arrived at the absolute perfect moment in history. Pizarro decided to do something that bordered on madness. Instead of waiting for reinforcements on the coast, he led his tiny group straight into the high Andes to meet the new emperor. For 2 grueling months, the Spaniards climbed through narrow gorges, struggling with thin air, freezing cold, and steep cliffs. They knew the Incas were watching them from a distance. A small group of warriors could have easily rolled boulders down the canyons and wiped them out. But the order to attack never came. The new emperor, Atahualpa, was resting in the highland town of Cajamarca, recovering in the natural hot springs after his victory over his brother. Surrounding the town was a massive military encampment, holding more than 80,000 battle-tested warriors. Atahualpa received regular reports from his scouts regarding the movement of the Spaniards. He knew exactly how many there were. He knew they brought strange animals and odd metal tubes. But from the perspective of a man who commanded an army of 80,000, 168 strangers posed absolutely no threat. Atahualpa did not hate them, nor did he fear them. He was simply curious. He wanted to see these strange men take their horses and weapons and use them as servants or sacrifice them to the gods. And so, he allowed them to march deep into the heart of his kingdom, completely unchallenged. It was a fatal mistake. When the Spaniards arrived at the edge of the Cajamarca Valley on November 15, 1532, and saw thousands of white tents covering the mountainside, panic set in. Spanish chroniclers recorded that many hardened soldiers literally wet themselves in terror. They were completely surrounded. There was no chance of escape. But Pizarro knew the rule that his cousin Hernán Cortés had used against the Aztecs. If you want to bring down an empire, you must capture its head. Pizarro positioned his men inside the empty buildings surrounding the main plaza of Cajamarca. They set up their cannons, loaded their harquebuses and crossbows, and waited. The following day, Atahualpa decided to enter the town. It was a magnificent procession. The emperor rode on a massive litter coated in gold and colorful feathers, carried by 80 of the highest-ranking nobles in the empire. Around him were musicians, dancers, and servants clearing the path before him. Following behind came nearly 6,000 men. But Convinced of his absolute power, Atahualpa made another tragic miscalculation. Hardly any of the 6,000 men who entered the plaza were carrying weapons. The vast majority of his army remained outside, on the plains. When the emperor arrived at the central square, he was met with total silence. The plaza was deserted. There was no army, no Pizarro. After a few tense moments, a single man stepped out from one of the buildings. A Catholic friar, Vicente de Valverde, holding a cross in one hand and a Bible in the other. Through a crude interpreter, the friar approached the emperor's litter. He stepped up to the man considered the son of the sun god and demanded that he accept the Christian faith and submit to the King of Spain. Atahualpa was stunned by such arrogance. He took the Bible, flicking through the pages without understanding the written language, as the Incas did not have books but used knotted strings called quipus to record information. Hearing nothing and seeing no purpose in the object, the emperor indignantly tossed the Bible to the ground, declaring that he would not leave until everything the Spaniards had stolen on their way was returned. That was the signal Pizarro had been waiting for. The friar ran back towards the buildings, shouting that the holy book had been desecrated. Pizarro gave the signal. From the windows of the surrounding buildings, cannon fire roared, and then hell broke loose. 168 Spaniards charged from their hiding spots, firing their harquebuses directly into the dense, unarmed crowd. The sound of gunpowder, the thick smoke, and the thunder of cannons unleashed unimaginable terror among the Incas, who had never seen firearms in their lives. Right behind the infantry, armored cavalry charged into the plaza at full gallop. The sound of bells on the horses' armor, the clashing steel, and massive war horses trampling everything in their path shattered the morale of the trapped crowd. Utter panic erupted. People desperately tried to escape, pressing against the stone walls of the plaza until a section of the wall collapsed under their weight. Amidst the slaughter, Pizarro had only one objective: the emperor's litter. Dozens of Inca nobles held the litter aloft with their bare hands. Even as the Spaniards severed their arms, others stepped in to take their place so their god would not fall to the ground. They were willing to die just to protect him. Fighting hand to hand, one of the Spanish soldiers swung his sword directly at Atahualpa. But Pizarro leaped forward, blocking the sword with his own hand and taking a deep wound. Pizarro knew if Atahualpa died in the chaos, the 80,000 warriors outside the city would grind every Spaniard into dust. The emperor had to be taken alive. The Spaniards finally overturned the litter, dragged the emperor down, and pulled him into one of the buildings. The Battle of Cajamarca lasted less than 30 minutes. More than 3,000 Incas lay dead in the plaza. The Spaniards did not lose a single soldier. The decision to capture the emperor alive proved to be a stroke of sinister genius. By holding Atahualpa, the entire chain of command in the empire was paralyzed. The Incas believed that if their living god was captured, any military move they made could result in his execution. The 80,000 soldiers standing outside the city, lacking orders from their emperor, simply melted away in confusion. Atahualpa, even in captivity, still believed he was dealing with simple bandits whom he could buy off. He noticed how the Spaniards' eyes gleamed at the mention of gold. And so, he made an offer that went down in history. He offered to fill the room in which he was held captive, 7 meters long and 5 meters wide, with pure gold, as high as his hand could reach. And he offered to fill 2 adjoining rooms with silver in exchange for his freedom. Pizarro could hardly believe his ears, but he accepted the deal. Over the next 2 months, processions arrived from every corner of the empire. They brought priceless golden temple ornaments, statues, vessels, and gold plates stripped from the walls of palaces. The Spaniards ruthlessly melted it all down into plain gold ingots. It was a treasure worth over $500 million in today's money. Yet, when the rooms were filled, Pizarro did not keep his word. Releasing the emperor was simply too great a risk. Instead of freedom, the Spaniards staged a mock trial. They accused Atahualpa of murdering his brother, worshipping false idols, and treason against the Spanish crown. He was sentenced to death by burning at the stake. But since the Incas believed that the body had to remain intact for the soul to pass into the afterlife, Atahualpa agreed to be baptized at the last minute. He was given the name Francisco in honor of the man who had captured him. In return, his sentence was commuted. On July 26, 1533, Emperor Atahualpa was garroted to death. With the death of the last independent emperor, the Inca Empire as an absolute power ceased to exist. Pizarro marched into the capital of Cusco, installing puppet rulers and exploiting internal divisions to solidify his control over the land. But the story does not end happily for the conquerors either. The very greed that brought them to Peru ultimately consumed them. Soon, the conquistadors turned on each other in a brutal civil war over the division of the spoils. Pizarro's old partner, Diego de Almagro, went to war against the Pizarro family. Executions, betrayals, and assassinations followed. Francisco Pizarro himself was assassinated in his palace in Lima in 1541, when Almagro's loyalists stormed his rooms and ran him through with swords. He died on the floor in his own blood, tracing a cross on the ground with his finger as he breathed his last. The final pockets of Inca resistance retreated deep into the cloud forests of the Andes, establishing a hidden refuge in the city of Vilcabamba. They fought a guerrilla war against the invaders for 40 years, until 1572, when the last resistance leader, Tupac Amaru, was captured and publicly executed in Cusco. With his death, the final spark of the Inca Empire was extinguished. And so fell one of the greatest empires the world had ever seen. It was brought down not just by steel and gunpowder, but by a tragic chain of events. An invisible plague, a devastating civil war, and the blind confidence of an emperor who failed to see his own doom in a handful of strangers. Empires rise, empires fall, but the echo of the Incas still lives on in the stone walls of Cusco and in the mountains that still guard their secrets.